Hello, I am Rich Robinson, and I'm the co-chair of the Thriving and Resilient Community Funding Circle of the Threshold Foundation, and I'm here with Don Hall, co-executive director of Transition US. Hello, Don. Good morning.
Yeah, great to be here, Richard.
Thank you very much for participating. I'm talking with Don because Transition US is involved in the Thriving and Resilient Communities Collaboratory. The Collaboratory is the community partner of the Thriving and Resilient Community Funding Circle. And we're here because I want to invite Don to share his experiences of participating in the Collaboratory and what he's discovered, what's that's been for the people who are not part of the Collaboratory to have a glimpse into it. So thank you very much, Don, for showing up.
Yeah.
For starters, please tell us about Transition US and your role in Transition US and Transition US participation in the Collaboratory, if you could.
Yeah, well, Transition US serves to bring people together all over this country to build local community resilience and self-reliance in the face of climate change, resource depletion, economic instability. And to do that by revitalizing local food systems, strengthening local economies, reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, and designing a way to a better future. So the Transition Towns movement started in 2005 in the UK. It's since spread to 1,200 initiatives around the world and 160 here in the United States. And we seek to support all of these local groups in their efforts by providing inspiration, encouragement, networking, support, and training for them.
So is your office the national office for Transition US, or is it a local California office?
So we have a main office in California for the national organization. I work remotely from Sarasota, Florida.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I recall. Thank you. And but it is the national office. So how many transition initiatives are there in the US?
Yeah, there's about 163 official transition initiatives in the US, to be exact. And there's a number of other groups that we regularly partner with or are aligned with that we also support. We're not just supporting those initiatives that call themselves official transition initiatives, but really working to support the greater community resilience movement as TRCC does.
Well, that's great. And that leads me to my next question. It sounds like Transition US is a pretty well-developed program in and of itself. What is it? What's the benefit? What's the upside of being involved in the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory?
Well, I think even as well-developed as Transition US is, no one organization can do it alone. So I think with the Thriving Resilient Communities Collaboratory, we're really building a movement of movements, if you will, that is large and diverse enough to really tackle the major problems that we're facing at this point in history and begin to turn the tide of history towards more resilient local communities.
That sounds great, right? And turn the tide of history. That's very bold and grand and exciting and everything, but in a very real way. Well, what was your experience? How long have you been with Transition US?
So I've been with Transition US for a little bit over a year now. I came on in February of 2017, helping to plan our first national gathering, which took place last year in July and August. And in August, I became co-director of Transition US. But I've been working in the transition movement for about 10 years now, first with Transition Colorado, and then I started Transition Sarasota here in Sarasota, Florida. So got some good experience working on the grassroots.
That sounds good. And you've been involved with Transition US for a year. What was your experience of coming in and discovering the collaboratory and coming into that community? What was that?
I think it's been great. The collaboratory has been very welcoming, and a lot of the organizations that I've looked up to and followed over the years are part of it. Post Carbon Institute and Shareable and News Stories and Movement Generation. These are many of the organizations that I feel like are doing the most important and the best work happening in the world today. So it's been really a joy to be among them.
Well, okay, thank you. Would you say that the involvement in the collaboratory has helped you connect to these other organizations that are doing good work with similar values and similar aspirations?
Absolutely. I mean, Transition US has been involved in the collaboratory for several years before I came along, and has really generated strong partnerships with a lot of the organizations that are part of the collaboratory. We have a proposal in this year with Post Carbon, Shareable, and News Stories that grew out of the TRCC. We've hosted many webinars with TRCC members. We had many of them participate in our national gathering. And so, yeah, that regular contact and that those personal relationships that are formed through TRCC activities have been extremely helpful in networking this movement as a whole.
When you say this movement as a whole, are you? I think what you're getting and what you're saying, and I want to draw it out, is that the TRCC is, and correct me, I don't want to suggest something that's not true, but what I'm understanding is the collaboratory is a container or a catalyst for these good organizations to be more movement oriented, to actually come together and support each other and have more of a movement strategy or a movement plan together. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think also being able to see the whole landscape of community resilience work that is going on in this country, and so that we're not duplicating each other's efforts or competing with each other, but rather collaborating and supporting each other's efforts at every chance.
Well, could you please talk about the movement strategy dialogue? We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah. So that was my first real involvement with the TRCC, and I greatly enjoyed it. I presented the first session last year on theory of change for Transition US, and that was warmly received. Got some good feedback on that. I also participated in several other sessions with presenters from other organizations that are part of the TRCC, and participated in the learning journeys and the systemic constellation that helped to synthesize all our learnings for that, and were eventually collected into a document and an interactive Prezi, capturing the key points, key insights that came out through the movement strategy dialogues. So I thought it was just a very rich experience, thinking about the big questions related to our activism with some of the brightest leaders in the field.
You know, I'm sorry, I asked you a question and I appreciate you answered it really well, but to take one step back for our listeners who might not even know what the movement strategy dialogue is, could you just introduce, just say what it is?
Well, I think this was the second or third year.
They might not be clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this was the second or third year that TRCC did this. I could be corrected. First year that I participated in it. It's a series of dialogues, usually a short presentation at the outset, and then a longer discussion around that. And some of the core topics were theories of change, regional organizing, movement building this year. And yeah, everybody participated in those dialogues, contributed the jewels that they harvested from each session, and then synthesize this all together. You know, what is really emerging in our movement at this time? What are the kind of key trends and big questions that we need to pay attention to? So I think it served a great purpose in that way.
Well, thank you very much. I just have one or two more questions before we close up. Um, have you ever participated in this kind of movement level conversation and coordination before? I mean, you've been in Transition US for 10 years. You've been involved in grassroots organization for however long. I'm assuming this is not your first rodeo. And have you ever been involved in this kind of, well, movement level strategizing and coordinating?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to some conferences and convergences, but never anything like the TRCC that's really ongoing, that really builds those relationships over a long period of time. There's these great national conferences and convergences where people from organizations like those that belong to the TRCC come together and talk with each other, but then usually there's a dissipation of that energy. And a lot of times the threads that are brought up in that aren't followed up on. And my experience with the TRCC is different in that it's an ongoing process, and the movement strategy dialogues then leads into the co-project initiative and this cycle of grant funding to establish those priorities, and collaborations arise like the one that we're doing around Stories to Action right now with Post Carbon News Stories and Shareable. So it seems a more cohesive process than I've been engaged with before.
Thank you. You brought up the co-projects. Could you please talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the co-project initiative, as best I can describe it, is a annual grant funding cycle in collaboration with the Threshold Foundation, and supporting organizations that are building thriving, resilient communities. And Transition US has regularly participated in this and received funding from the Threshold Foundation in the past. And we're applying again this year, both as part of that Stories to Action collaboration that I mentioned, and with another proposal on bridging social justice and community resilience movements that we're really excited about. And I would say that the grant writing process isn't that much different from other grant writing processes I've been involved in before, but I would say the TRC Co-Project Council, which I recently joined, that's reviewing all of these applications, is really unique and different.
So, okay, I got two questions, and then we're going to wrap up. One is the co-project. Does that imply or mean that it's different organizations coming together to do projects together? Is that what a co-project is?
I think sometimes that's what's involved, not in every case. I don't know, you'd have to ask the people who named it, but I imagine it somewhat has to do with this collaborative grant-making process where the organizations themselves who have submitted applications come together to discuss those proposals and where the priority for funding lies. So I think that's a really innovative and empowering process for the organizations that are involved.
Thank you. And the last question is about, you said that you've recently joined the council, the TRC Council. Could you please explain to the viewers what the council is and what your role is?
Well, I think there's a couple different councils. There's a council that's steering the TRCC as a whole. I'm part of the grant review team for the co-project initiative. And we're going through, right now there's a series of 4 online meetings where we're reviewing 4 proposals each meeting, asking some deeper questions about the proposals, and then prioritizing which projects get how much funding. And I think that all the proposals that I've read so far are fantastic. So I hope that there's a big pool of money to be able to fund all these great initiatives this year. And I think it's going to be a difficult decision if we have to decide who gets how much funding. But I do think it's really a great exercise in working together. I've really enjoyed reading all the grants and hearing about the projects that the organizations involved with the TRCC are putting forth. And I think I really appreciate the opportunity to have organizations like Transition US involved in the funding process. Oftentimes we send out a grant application and it goes into a black hole and we never hear back if it wasn't funded, what we could have done better, or any feedback on the proposal whatsoever. And here we're getting feedback throughout the process and able to really refine our ideas, make the project stronger, and elicit opportunities for collaboration with other organizations that might be aligned with the work that we're proposing.
Mm-hmm. So you're describing that you're involved in a team who's reviewing the grant applications. Traditionally, I mean, in most situations, that's what the philanthropists do, or the philanthropists allocate that to whatever it is, a foundation employee or something. And here, you're part of the grant applicant. Your organization is a grant applicant. You're one of however many grant applicants in the collaboratory, and yet you're also on the team who's reviewing the applications and deciding on the granting. Well, have you ever done that before?
No, I've never really heard of that being done before. And so we're still at the beginning of the process. This is my first time through, but so far, I mean, I left the first session with a big smile on my face, just really enjoying the collaboration that went on in that session, the opportunity to really dig into the work of these amazing organizations and provide them with feedback and build connections. So, yeah, I'm really glad that I joined, and I'm really appreciative that there are stipends from the TRCC to support peer review, because it is a fair amount of work, but definitely worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're about to wrap up. What do you want people to know about getting involved with the funding circle and donating to it?
Well, I think I said it already, but I'll say it again. I think that this is an amazing organization. I think that the collaboration that they foster between the amazing organizations that are members of the TRCC is extremely important, building this movement of movements, supporting rather than competing with each other. And yeah, I think that this is building resilient communities all throughout this country is some of the most important work that we could be supporting right now, and extremely timely and very urgent.
Well, thank you very much, Don. I think we're good. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your views. I think it's probably very helpful for the viewers who are not familiar or only minimally familiar with what the TRC Funding Circle and the TRC Collaboratory are doing. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you very much.